train arrived in Blackwood just before sunset. Ethan Carter stood alone on the small platform, a worn leather bag hanging from his shoulder. The station looked exactly as he remembered it 20 years ago. Old wooden benches, faded signs, and the silence so deep it felt almost sacred. Nothing had changed, except him. The autumn wind swept through the valley, carrying the scent of pine trees and distant rain. Beyond the town, the vast Blackwood forest stretched toward the mountains like an endless ocean of dark green. For a moment, Ethan simply stood there. He had promised himself he would never come back. Yet, here he was. A week earlier, he had received a phone call from the town sheriff. His father was dead. William Carter, the man he had spent 20 years trying to forget, the man he blamed for everything. The funeral had already begun by the time Ethan reached the small stone church. Rain tapped gently against the stained glass windows. Inside the room was filled with faces he barely recognized. Many of the older townspeople remembered him instantly. Some offered polite smiles, others simply nodded. Nobody asked where he had been. Nobody asked why he stayed away so long. Everyone already knew. At the front of the church rested a simple wooden coffin. No flowers, no elaborate decorations, just a small brass lantern placed beside it. The sight hit Ethan harder than he expected. His father had carried that lantern for decades while patrolling the forest as a ranger. He remembered watching the old man disappear into the darkness at night, the lantern swaying gently in his hand. As a child, Ethan believed his father was protecting the forest from monsters. As a teenager, he believed his father was the monster. The priest spoke softly. People cried. Stories were shared. William Carter had rescued hikers during storms. He had searched for missing children. He had saved countless people from getting lost in the mountains. Listening to them felt strange. They were describing a man Ethan no longer knew, or perhaps never truly knew. When the service ended, people slowly gathered outside beneath the gray sky. An elderly woman named Margaret approached him. She had once been his school teacher. Her face was wrinkled now, but her eyes remained kind. "I'm sorry for your loss, Ethan." He forced a smile. "Thank you." Margaret hesitated. "Your father loved this town." Ethan looked away. He loved the forest more. The old woman sighed. "No." Her voice was gentle. "He loved you more than anything." Before Ethan could answer, she turned and walked away. The words lingered in his mind long after she disappeared. That evening, Ethan unlocked the door to his father's house. The cabin sat at the edge of town, overlooking the forest. Everything smelled of old wood and pine needles. Dust covered the furniture. The clock on the wall had stopped. Yet somehow, the house still felt alive, as though its owner had only stepped outside for a moment. Ethan spent hours sorting through belongings. Books, maps, photographs, fishing gear, old ranger reports. His father's entire life fit inside this small cabin, and everywhere he looked, memories waited. Some good, most painful. Around midnight, exhaustion finally settled over him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat beside the living room window. Outside the forest stood silent beneath a blanket of fog. The moon occasionally appeared through moving clouds. Everything seemed peaceful. Then Ethan noticed something. A light. At first he thought it was a car, but no roads existed beyond the tree line. The light moved slowly between the trees. Golden, steady, familiar. His breath caught. The light resembled an old oil lantern. For several seconds he stared without moving. The lantern drifted deeper into the forest before vanishing behind the fog. Gone. Just like that. Ethan rubbed his eyes. Perhaps he was tired. Perhaps grief was playing tricks on him. Still, unease settled into his chest. The next morning, he went into town for breakfast. The diner hadn't changed either. Same cracked booths, same smell of coffee, same waitress. Mary Benson looked surprised when she saw him. "Ethan Carter." "Good morning, Mary." She laughed. "Haven't seen you in 20 years. Something like that." She poured coffee and sat across from him. The conversation drifted toward old memories until Ethan mentioned the light he had seen. Mary's smile faded. "You saw it." "Saw what?" "The lantern." Ethan leaned back. "So it's not just me." Mary exchanged a glance with one of the cooks. Neither seemed eager to talk. Finally, she lowered her voice. "People have been seeing it for years." "Seeing what exactly?" "The lantern in Blackwood Forest." Ethan chuckled. "You make it sound like a ghost story." "No." Mary's expression remained serious. That's exactly what it is. A cold silence followed. She continued. After your father retired, people started noticing a light moving through the woods at night. Ethan shook his head. Probably hikers. There are no hikers at 2 in the morning during winter storms. He had no response to that. Mary looked out the window toward the forest. Most folks believe it's your father. Ethan nearly laughed. Instead, something stopped him, because he remembered what he saw. The light hadn't looked modern. It wasn't a flashlight. It wasn't a vehicle. It had looked exactly like the lantern resting beside his father's coffin. That afternoon, Ethan visited the sheriff's office to handle paperwork regarding the property. The current sheriff, Daniel Reeves, had known William for years. As they worked through documents, Ethan eventually asked about the stories. The lantern. Daniel sighed immediately. So you've heard. People really believe my father is wandering around the woods. The sheriff smiled weakly. People believe lots of things. Do you? Daniel paused. For a long moment, he studied the papers. Then he answered carefully. I believe I've seen something I can't explain. The answer unsettled Ethan more than outright belief would have. Before leaving, he asked another question. When was the last time someone saw it? Daniel looked at him. Last night. The walk back to the cabin felt longer than usual. Clouds gathered over the mountains. The air carried the promise of rain. Everywhere Ethan looked, reminders of his father seemed to appear. A trail marker, an old ranger sign, boot prints near a creek, ghosts of memory hiding in plain sight. By evening, rain finally arrived. Heavy drops hammered the roof. The forest vanished behind sheets of water. Ethan tried reading, tried sleeping, tried drinking. Nothing worked. His thoughts kept returning to the lantern. Eventually, sometime after midnight, he found himself standing at the window again, watching, waiting. The storm slowly weakened. Fog rolled through the trees, and then, there it was. The light, far deeper in the forest this time. Golden, steady, moving. His pulse quickened. The lantern drifted between the trees as if carried by invisible hands. Not rushing, not wandering, almost purposeful, almost guiding. Ethan grabbed binoculars from a shelf and looked closer. The image trembled slightly, but he could make out enough. A lantern, an actual lantern, swinging gently, yet whoever carried it remained hidden within the fog. The figure never emerged. Only the light. Always the light. For nearly 10 minutes, Ethan watched, unable to look away. Then the lantern stopped, completely still, deep within the darkness. A strange feeling crawled through him, an impossible certainty. It was waiting, waiting for him. Suddenly a memory surfaced, a long-forgotten moment from childhood. He was 8 years old, lost in the forest, terrified, crying, night falling around him. Then a lantern appeared, through the darkness. His father's lantern, guiding him safely home. Back then, Ethan had never been afraid of the forest, because as long as that light existed, he knew someone was looking for him. Someone would always find him. The memory struck like a knife. Before he realized it, tears had formed in his eyes. He quickly wiped them away. The lantern remained motionless, silent, patient, beyond the trees. Ethan stared at it for what felt like forever. Finally, he whispered words he hadn't spoken in decades. Why now? The forest offered no answer, only silence, and a single golden light glowing deep within Blackwood Forest. The next morning, Ethan packed a backpack, a compass, a flashlight, food, water, a map. He stood at the edge of the forest just after sunrise. Mist drifted between the ancient pines. The path ahead disappeared into shadows. For the first time in 20 years, he stepped beneath the trees. He wasn't searching for ghosts. At least that was what he told himself. But deep inside, another part of him hoped for something impossible. One last conversation, one last chance, one last answer. Far beyond the trees, hidden somewhere within Blackwood Forest, the mystery of the lantern waited. And Ethan was finally ready to follow it. The forest remembered. That was the first thought that entered Ethan Carter's mind as he stepped beneath the towering pines of Blackwood. The morning mist drifted silently between the trees, turning the woods into a world suspended between dream and reality. Sunlight struggled to reach the forest floor, breaking through only in thin golden shafts. Ethan adjusted the straps of his backpack and glanced at the old compass resting in his hand. It had belonged to his father. The brass casing was scratched and worn from decades of use. He remembered seeing William Carter check it countless times before heading into the wilderness. Back then, Ethan had believed his father knew every secret hidden inside Blackwood Forest. Now he wondered if that had actually been true. The path ahead was familiar, not because he had walked it recently, because he had walked it hundreds of times as a child. Every root, every bend, every giant pine, they all seemed to exist exactly where memory had left them. The deeper he walked, the quieter the world became. Soon even the sounds of the town disappeared behind him. Only the forest remained, and his thoughts. 20 years. 20 years of anger. 20 years of silence. 20 years without a single meaningful conversation with his father. The realization weighed heavily on him. For most of his adult life, he had convinced himself he no longer cared. Yet standing here now, surrounded by the places that had shaped him, Ethan felt something he hadn't expected. Regret. Not sharp, not overwhelming, just a dull ache that seemed to grow with every step. Hours passed. The forest stretched endlessly around him. Several times he thought he saw a flicker of golden light between the trees. Every time he moved toward it, it vanished, almost as if it wanted him to follow. At midday, he reached a small stream. The sight stopped him instantly. He knew this place. The water flowed over smooth stones exactly as it had decades ago. A fallen log still crossed the stream, the old fishing spot. For a long moment, Ethan simply stood there. Then, memories came flooding back. The summer afternoon. A boy no older than 10. A patient father teaching him how to cast a fishing line. William's deep voice. The sound of laughter. The warmth of sunlight dancing across the water. It felt so vivid that Ethan could almost hear it. He remembered catching his first trout here. Remembered running excitedly along the shore while his father laughed. Back then, life had seemed simple, safe, whole. Ethan sat on the same fallen log and stared at the moving water. A strange realization surfaced. Most of his memories of William before age 16 were good. Very good. So when had everything changed? When had admiration become resentment? The question lingered as he continued deeper into the forest. The terrain gradually became steeper. Ancient trees surrounded him like silent guardians. Around mid-afternoon, he saw the lantern again. Far ahead. Golden. Steady. Moving slowly through the woods. His pulse quickened. Wait. The word escaped before he realized it. The lantern continued forward. Not faster. Not slower. Simply leading. Ethan followed. The chase lasted nearly half an hour. Eventually, the light disappeared near a massive oak tree. An enormous oak. One that Ethan recognized immediately. His breath caught. The initials were still there. E.C.W.C. Carved into the bark decades ago. Father and son. He slowly reached out and touched the weathered letters. Another memory emerged. He had been 13. William had handed him a pocket knife. One day his father had said, "You'll leave this place and build your own life." Ethan remembered smiling. "Will you be sad?" William had laughed softly. "Of course." "Then why would you want me to leave?" His father had looked toward the horizon. "Because loving someone means wanting them to become who they're meant to be." At 13, Ethan hadn't fully understood. At 38, standing alone beneath the oak tree, he finally did. A cold breeze passed through the branches overhead. Leaves drifted toward the ground. For a brief moment, Ethan wished desperately that he could return to that afternoon. Just for 5 minutes. Just long enough to ask questions he never asked. Long enough to listen. But life offered no such mercy. The dead remained silent. Or so he believed. As evening approached, the forest darkened. The lantern appeared again, this time closer, brighter, more deliberate. Ethan followed without hesitation. The path grew increasingly narrow. Roots twisted across the earth like ancient veins. Eventually he reached the edge of a rocky cliff. His entire body froze. The Overlook. The most dangerous place in Blackwood Forest. A place he hadn't seen in over 20 years. A place connected to one of the most painful memories of his life. The cliff overlooked an enormous valley. Far below, a river wound through the mountains. As a teenager, Ethan had nearly fallen from this very ledge. He remembered losing his footing on loose gravel. Remembered sliding toward the edge. Remembered terror. And most of all, he remembered his father's hand grabbing him at the last possible second. William had pulled him to safety. Afterward, instead of thanking him, Ethan had exploded with anger. He had accused his father of treating him like a child, accused him of never trusting him. The argument had lasted hours. Standing there now, Ethan closed his eyes. The memory made him cringe. How many times had his father saved him? How many sacrifices had gone unnoticed? The lantern glowed once more between the trees, then disappeared, as if satisfied, as if it had shown him what he needed to remember. Night approached quickly. Ethan considered returning home. Instead, something pulled him onward. A feeling. An instinct. Or perhaps hope. By dusk, he found himself entering a section of the forest he didn't recognize. The trees grew older here, larger. The air itself felt different, almost sacred. The silence deepened. Then he saw it. A structure hidden among the pines. A small wooden cabin. Or rather, what remained of one. The roof sagged from age. Moss covered the walls. Nature had slowly begun reclaiming it. Ethan approached cautiously. His heart hammered inside his chest. The lantern stood in front of the cabin, glowing softly, waiting. Then for the first time, it vanished completely. Not fading, not moving away. Gone, as though its purpose had been fulfilled. Ethan stepped onto the porch. The wood creaked beneath his boots. A rusted sign hung beside the door. Blackwood Ranger Outpost. His eyes widened. He had heard stories about this place as a child. An old ranger station abandoned decades ago. William had occasionally mentioned it, but never brought him here. The door opened with a groan. Dust swirled through the fading light. Inside stood a single room. Broken furniture, shelves, maps, old equipment, everything frozen in time. For several minutes, Ethan searched quietly. Nothing seemed unusual. Then he noticed something beneath an overturned desk. A wooden chest. His pulse quickened. The lock had long since rusted away. He lifted the lid. Inside lay dozens of notebooks, carefully stacked, protected from moisture, protected from time. Ethan opened the first one. The handwriting was unmistakable. His father's. The date on the first page was nearly 20 years old. He sat down slowly, then began reading. The first entries were ordinary. Weather reports, forest observations, notes about wildlife. Then the subject changed. Ethan. Every few pages, his father's thoughts appeared. Simple observations, simple concerns, simple hopes. Today, Ethan left for college. I pretended not to cry after he drove away. He looked excited. I'm proud of him. Ethan's vision blurred. He turned the page. Another entry. I called him tonight. No answer. Maybe he's busy. I hope he's eating properly. Another page. Saw a newspaper article about Ethan's promotion. Bought 3 copies. Another. He still won't return my calls. Maybe one day. Another. Passed his birthday today. Made his favorite pie anyway. The cabin became utterly silent. Only the sound of pages turning remained. Hour after hour, Ethan read. And with every entry, the image of his father transformed. This wasn't the harsh man he remembered from their final years together. This was a father who never stopped loving his son. A father who watched from afar. A father who waited. Every notebook told the same story. Hope, patience, love, and loneliness. Outside darkness consumed the forest. Moonlight filtered through broken windows. Ethan continued reading. Eventually he reached the final notebook, the most recent one. His hands trembled. Something felt different. The pages grew increasingly personal, increasingly emotional. Then he found the final entry. Unlike the others, this one wasn't dated. It appeared unfinished. The handwriting seemed shaky, as if written during illness. Ethan took a slow breath, then began to read. The first sentence stopped his heart. If Ethan ever finds these journals, then it is finally time for him to know the truth about what happened that night. The air seemed to leave the room. Ethan stared at the page. Confusion, fear, disbelief. His father's final secret waited beneath those words. A secret buried for more than 20 years. A secret connected to the argument that destroyed their family. Outside, somewhere deep within Blackwood Forest, a cold wind moved through the trees. The old cabin groaned softly. And for the first time since returning home, Ethan realized that everything he believed about his father might be wrong. Very wrong. With trembling hands, he turned the page and began reading the truth. Ethan Carter sat alone in the abandoned ranger outpost, staring at the final page of his father's journal. Outside, Blackwood Forest had fallen into complete darkness. The wind moved through the trees like a voice too old to belong to any living thing. The broken cabin walls creaked softly around him, and for a long while, Ethan could not bring himself to read another word. His hands trembled. The sentence remained before him, black ink on yellowed paper. If Ethan ever finds these journals, then it is finally time for him to know the truth about what happened that night. That night. He knew exactly which night his father meant. The night everything ended. The night he left Blackwood. The night he stopped being William Carter's son. Ethan swallowed hard and forced himself to continue reading. William's handwriting was weaker than in the earlier journals, but every word felt deliberate. Ethan believed I hated him after what happened. He believed I blamed him. God forgive me. I let him believe it because I thought distance would protect him. Ethan's breath caught. He turned the page. The man who fell near the overlook that night was not hurt because of Ethan. My boy tried to stop him. He tried to help. But fear and confusion twisted the story before truth could breathe. The cabin seemed to tilt beneath him. Ethan remembered the storm. He remembered being 18, reckless and furious, arguing with a stranger near the cliff trail after a town festival. The man had been drunk. There had been shouting, a shove, loose gravel, a terrible scream, then blood, then his father arriving with the lantern. Ethan had believed for 20 years that he had ruined a man's life. The next lines blurred before his eyes. I told them it was my fault. I said I failed to secure the trail. I said I should have closed the overlook during the storm. I signed every paper they put in front of me. I accepted the blame because Ethan had a future, and I had already lived most of mine. Ethan covered his mouth. A sound escaped him, broken and unfamiliar. Not quite a sob, not quite a breath. He hated me after that. He thought my silence was judgment. But how could I tell him the truth when the truth would only reopen the wound? So I let him leave. I watched him walk away. It was the hardest thing I ever did. The journal slipped from Ethan's hands. For several minutes, he could not move. 20 years of anger collapsed inside him. The cold father, the unforgiving father, the man Ethan had spent half his life resenting. None of it had been real. William Carter had not abandoned him. He had saved him. Again, just as he had pulled him from the cliff when he was a boy. Just as he had searched for him with the lantern when he was lost in the forest. Just as he had quietly loved him from a distance, year after year, birthday after birthday, unanswered call after unanswered call. Ethan bent forward, pressing his hands against his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words were small. Useless. Too late. "I'm so sorry." Outside, thunder rolled over the mountains. Rain began to fall. At first gently, then harder. The storm arrived with sudden violence, hammering against the old roof, and pouring through the broken windows. Ethan picked up the journal again. There was one final passage. "If I am gone before Ethan comes home, I pray the forest will do what I could not. I pray it will bring him back to the places where love still lives. I pray he sees the lantern one more time and remembers that no matter how far a son runs, a father still looks for him in the dark." Ethan pressed the journal against his chest. The storm raged around him. Then through the broken doorway of the outpost, he saw it. The lantern. Golden, steady, glowing in the rain. It stood just beyond the trees, waiting. Ethan rose slowly. Every instinct told him to stay inside until morning, but his heart already knew. This was the final path. He placed the journal carefully back inside the chest, closed the lid, and stepped out into the storm. Rain soaked him within seconds. Mud clung to his boots. Branches whipped against his coat. Still, the lantern moved ahead of him, swaying gently through the blackness. Ethan followed. The forest was almost unrecognizable at night. The familiar trees became towering shadows. The trails vanished beneath water and fallen leaves. The wind howled through the branches like a choir of mourning voices. But the lantern never disappeared. Whenever Ethan stumbled, it slowed. Whenever he lost the path, it waited. And with each step, more memories came back. His father's hand on his shoulder. His father's voice teaching him how to read the stars. His father's quiet laughter beside the stream. His father's tired face the night Ethan left. That last memory, cut deepest. Ethan saw himself again at 18, standing in the doorway of the cabin, suitcase and hand rage burning inside him. "You were never proud of me, young," Ethan had shouted. William had stood by the fireplace, silent, too silent. "I hope I never become anything like you." Those had been his final words before leaving. The final words his father had carried for 20 years. Ethan stopped walking. Rain ran down his face, hiding the tears. "Dad," he called into the forest. Only thunder answered. The lantern continued forward. Ethan followed until the trees began to thin. He knew where it was leading him before he arrived. The overlook, the cliff, the place where everything had broken. Lightning flashed across the sky, revealing the valley far below. The river roared in the darkness. The wind was fierce here, pulling at Ethan's coat, pushing against his body, as if warning him to turn back. The lantern hovered near the edge of the cliff. Then it stopped. Ethan approached slowly. His heart pounded, and then he saw him. At first it was only a shape in the rain. A tall figure standing beside the lantern. Broad shoulders, old ranger coat, hat lowered against the storm. Ethan froze. The figure turned. William Carter stood at the edge of Blackwood Forest, exactly as Ethan remembered him from childhood. Not old and sick, not lying still in a coffin, but strong, quiet, kind. The lantern glowed beside him, casting golden light across his face. Ethan could not breathe. For a moment, father and son simply looked at each other. 20 years stood between them. 20 years of silence. 20 years of pain. Then Ethan broke. He fell to his knees in the mud. "I'm sorry," he cried. I didn't know what you did for me." William did not speak. He only watched him with those familiar tired eyes. Eyes Ethan had mistaken for coldness. Eyes that had only ever carried love. "I hated you," Ethan whispered. "And you still loved me." The old ranger took one slow step closer. Rain passed through him like mist, but the light around him remained warm. Ethan looked up, shaking. "I wasted so much time." William smiled. A small smile. The same smile Ethan remembered from childhood. The smile that had once made every fear seem less frightening. Then at last William spoke. His voice was soft, almost hidden beneath the storm. "No time given to love is wasted, son." Ethan sobbed openly then. All the grief he had held back at the funeral. All the guilt. All the years of pretending he felt nothing. It poured out of him beneath the storm. "I should have come home." William's expression remained gentle. "You did." Ethan shook his head. "Too late." William looked toward the forest, then back at him. The forest does not count years the way men do. The lantern flickered. The storm seemed to quiet around them. For one impossible moment, the world held still. Ethan wanted to run to him, to embrace him, to be a child again. But some distance cannot be crossed, even by love. William lifted the lantern. Its golden light spread across the cliff, across the trees, across Ethan's tear-streaked face. "Go home, Ethan." The words broke him. Because he understood. Not the cabin, not the town. Home meant something deeper. Home meant forgiveness. Home meant accepting that love had been there all along. Ethan nodded through tears. "I love you, Dad." William's smile trembled. "I know." The lantern shone brighter. For a moment, Ethan saw not only his father, but every memory of him at once. William teaching him to fish. William carrying him home after he twisted his ankle. William standing in the snow with the lantern raised high. William watching from the station platform the day Ethan left hidden behind the crowd, unable to say goodbye. Then the light began to fade. "No," Ethan whispered. William stepped back into the rain. His shape became mist. The lantern glowed one final time. Then, both father and light dissolved into the darkness of Blackwood Forest. The storm ended before dawn. Ethan remained at the overlook until the first pale light touched the valley. When morning came, the forest looked ordinary again. Wet leaves, broken branches, mist over the river, no ghost, no lantern, only silence. But something inside Ethan had changed. The emptiness he had carried for 20 years was still there, but it no longer felt endless. It had a shape now, a name, a place to rest. He returned to the cabin near town just after sunrise. For the first time, it did not feel like his father's house. It felt like home. In the weeks that followed, Ethan stayed. At first, people assumed he was only settling William's affairs. Then autumn deepened. Winter came. And still Ethan remained. He repaired the roof, cleaned the rooms, restored the old maps on the walls. He visited Mary at the diner, spoke often with Sheriff Daniel Reeves. One afternoon he walked into the ranger office and asked if Blackwood needed another pair of hands. The uniform felt strange at first, the boots even stranger, but the forest accepted him, or perhaps it had been waiting. A year later, on the anniversary of William Carter's death, Ethan walked the old trail at dusk. He carried his father's brass compass in one pocket and the old lantern in his hand, the same lantern from the funeral. Its flame burned gently against the evening mist. At the overlook, Ethan stood quietly and looked across the valley. "I found my way back," he said. The wind moved through the trees. Soft, almost like an answer, far below the river carried the last light of sunset toward the mountains. Ethan smiled through the ache in his chest. Then he turned and began his patrol. Behind him, deep within Blackwood Forest, another golden light appeared for just a moment between the trees. Not to frighten, not to haunt, but to guide. Because some lights are not meant to lead us through the forest. Some lights are meant to lead us home.